you guys are selecting Merrick for your telehealth platform needs. They have a couple different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. There's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are. Thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk Merrick Health for all your hormone optimization and performance.
Enjoy the show.
Today's episode is brought to you by EliteFTS.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help EliteFTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, EliteFTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the EliteFTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk.
Yeah.
All right. What's up, guys? We're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Dr. Stu McGill. Really doesn't require any introduction, so we want this to be very conversational. I do have some questions. Sam has some questions. But one thing that you were speaking about before we started that I'm very interested in is you're doing an experiment right now based upon Peter Attia's work, right?
Yeah.
So what are you doing, and before I go there, what motivated you to want to do it?
Well, to be perfectly transparent, my physician is a former student. And when I asked him, would he be my physician? He said, well, it doesn't surprise me, because when you wrote my reference letter to get into medical school, you said you need a good doc for when you're an old man. So I'm there now.
I like that.
And he said, well, your cholesterol's creeping up. He says, I'd like you to, let's do an experiment for 3 months and see how much you can beat the genetic influence here.
Yeah.
So at about the same time, Peter Attia contacted me and would I be a guest on his podcast? And as much as podcasters investigate me to have a good conversation, I do my homework and learn a little bit about them. So I thought I better read Peter's book, Outlive. It's one of the few books that I have to say would cause me to change my behavior. And the whole thesis of the book is to, instead of being sick for the last 10 years of your life, have the pretty good last 10 years of your life. And here's the formula of how to do it. And he talks about, cancer, Alzheimer's and neurological deterioration, metabolic disease, etc. All of which, and he gives the evidence for, can be mitigated through lifestyle. Well, I'm 66 now. I don't have too many more years to change that behavior. But nonetheless, I was convinced by his very articulate arguments. And as I said, they just make good sense. So I stopped drinking alcohol. Well, have a fairly strong genetic Celtic influence. And I've always enjoyed drinking, but I thought, all right, for the first time now I'm going to stop. So I did. And I watched my sugar intake. What else have I done? I've always had a activity regimen, and we can talk about that. When I was a young fella, I would strength train. And never did mobility training, never needed to. But now I train what we call the biblical training week, and we can talk about that later. But nonetheless, getting back to Peter Attia's influence. So I am now noticeably sleeping better, and I never thought that would be possible just through not drinking.
What do you mean by noticeably? You're not waking up as much to pee, or
Yes.
you're sleeping longer?
Yeah,
So,
well, that's an astute comment. Yeah. So is it because you don't need to pee, or is it you're just in a deeper sleep?
yeah,
I think it's both.
yeah.
I think it's both. And I've lost a lot of weight. In fact, I've had problems keeping it on.
Mhm.
So I've never taken protein supplements. I played football in university and whatnot. At one time, I was 50 pounds heavier. But when I returned to civilian life after university sports, I have never taken a supplement of any sort. Well, I think I might start a little bit now.
Mhm.
Anyway, I don't know if that's
Well, I'm
where we are
interested
on
in
this,
the not having to wake up in the middle of the night to pee thing, because I've been battling that myself. As
Yeah.
we get older, that seems to happen more. And what changes do you think have helped with that?
not having a nightcap or 2 glasses of wine
Yeah.
with dinner and maybe a beer before.
Yeah, yeah.
And probably just getting into that zone of sleep where I don't need to wake up.
Hmm.
Yeah. My wife says I make less noise. Now, I don't know if that means less snoring or whatever
Or
it is.
deeper sleep, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
with the exercise regimen, did that change?
Not really. Not really. Yeah, I'm hedging a little bit because I've probably been a bit conscious of my appearance and maybe doing a little bit more strength, but that's only in the last 3 weeks, so there would be no visible
Yeah.
evidence of any change yet.
So the majority of the changes were the sugar and the alcohol pulling out.
Yeah, I believe so.
How hard was that to do?
Very hard. I loved alcohol and I love chocolate.
How did you? Well, this is interesting to me, right? Because when we get into some of the case studies, there's a correlation that I'm seeing here, where you'll get some of the meatheads or the athletes that just love what they're doing so much they can't do what they can. They decide not to do some of the things you may ask them to do because their love for what they're doing is so much that it's an addiction in a way, right? Where with the alcohol, you're kind of mentally that same thing. You're kind of asked to do something and you want to do it, and you obviously you complied with it, but yet you kind of don't, right?
I think I know where you're coming from. So I'm asking athletes and pained people to have radical behavior change if they are going to make a difference in their pain. And if that's where
Well, to them, it would be radical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've always said I have strength of mind and mental, emotional constitution that I can do whatever I want.
Yes.
Well, can I? Have I really tested the depths
Okay.
of that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think I can. So if I say I'm going to do something, I think I can. So that's my test that I'm going through now.
Yeah.
And I was at Serrano's house for dinner last night, and they kept asking me to have that glass of wine. I said, no, thanks.
Oh man, that's
Good
going
for
back
you.
to college, right? Like, here, drink this, drink this.
It is, and that's a tough crowd, as you know. Yeah.
So you feel better then, I assume. So
Yeah.
you're sleeping better. You should feel better.
Dave, it's like I'm walking on springs.
Really?
I just feel so light on my feet. I don't feel any stress concentrations. And, I've got some miles on my body and an injury history. I haven't really noticed it. I hate to gloat. I feel fabulous.
No, that's great, right?
Yeah.
Because it can lead other people to try to do the same.
Right.
I'm interested in your injury history because Sam sent me one of the messages. Like, ask him about his lower back issues that he's dealt with.
Yeah.
So what is your injury history?
I'm so glad you're here, Sam. Well,
If you need a good low back guy, I got you.
Yeah, I know that's Well, just so people know, I do try and train elite clinicians, of which Sam is one.
Yes.
So we refer patients to Sam in full confidence. And thanks for making me look good. And I hope vice versa.
Oh, absolutely.
Well. No, I'm glad you brought that up because I should have put that in the introduction.
Yeah. If we go back to being a kid, I broke my right hip playing hockey. It never set properly. And in fact, I broke the socket side too, the acetabulum. So I had a limp my entire adult life. I started lifting weights in earnest in 10th grade. A little bit of a backstory there. I'll get to answer the full history. Yeah. Do you remember the first of the big women pro bodybuilders, Kay Baxter?
Yes.
She was originally an Ohio girl. Mm-hmm. She was my 9th grade teacher.
Are you kidding me?
Can you imagine watching her walk back and forth? And I swear half the guys that year started lifting weights.
Yeah. Wow.
But the next year in high school, we had a coach. He was our football coach and my track coach and a history teacher, Mr. Callucci. And he just looked the part. He was a bodybuilder, played fullback for McMaster University as a student there. And we just started to train. I actually quit high school to be a plumber. The career counselor told my father at a parent-teacher night, I'm probably not academic material. I'd be better suited to trade school. Mr. Callucci called me up and said, no, come back and play football. And I'm not trying to make myself as a great athlete or anything, but I was good enough to get recruited to university, still with a limp.
Yeah.
And had this sort of hobbly horse.
What position?
Oh, you won't believe it. I was a defensive tackle in high school. I left high school around 220. Mm-hmm. And then I switched to offensive guard thinking I'm not really large enough or strong enough to hold my own at defensive tackle, and I hated it. It was my brain is not someone to follow the rules and play offense. Yeah. I just that wasn't me. And
what the offense you didn't like?
Oh, I hated it.
Yeah, the defense is more reactive.
Oh yeah. That was my will. Mm-hmm. But anyway, let's see now. In university, I took a chip off the front of my C4 with my head down on the hockey rink playing hockey. So that was sort of touch and go. And then I've had injuries mostly related with trees.
This just went a whole nother direction.
Yeah. I remember I was with one of my Dutch graduate students and sawing down some trees in our woods. And if you saw down a tree in Holland, you go to jail. So he didn't know how to run chainsaws or anything like that. And I sawed down a large birch tree, I think it was. Probably several tons, a log around this round and 20 feet long. You can spot the professor here, Dave. It was on a hill, pinned to the hill about 30 degrees with a cherry tree. Stupid me thought, I can make some furniture out of that cherry tree. Yeah. I'm going to zip it off. Now I've got this big, massive log rolling at me, chasing me down the hill. And I slipped and it rolled over my arm. So it tore infraspinatus. Then I was walking down a hill, slipped into a tree, and that just about finished the shoulder with that one. Now you're going to really, I'm going to make you smile. Oh, I forgot to tell you that at the end of my first season, I fractured the M plate of L4 lumbar vertebra. So that made me compression intolerant for a good number of years. So if that's the lumbar injury you were talking about. And it took me a few years to overcome that. 2 years ago, I have a personality flaw, I guess. I've always enjoyed high performance snowmobiles. I bought the hottest sled I could find 3 years ago. 2 years ago, I thought, well, I'm going to do one speed run home across the open bay, Georgian Bay. I was going about 100 miles an hour and I hit a rock. And the guy behind me, at that speed, you run quite a rooster tail of snow. But this guy was just outside and he said, I saw your tail light go way up in the air. And I fractured T10, it was mid-thoracic. And that tenderness just went away this spring. So that was about 1.5 years of a very specific back injury. So you can spot the professor and the spine consultant here.
Well, it's and it's what's going through my mind now is you feel so much better, right? Because of the health changes.
Yeah.
So that's just going to lead to more chaotic snowmobile work.
Well, I still have a Y chromosome.
Of course. What were you studying in university?
I started, the football coach said, what do you want to take? And I said, well, I'm not even interested in university. That was our conversation.
Yeah.
And he said, well, we put guys like you in phys ed. So I started in phys ed, and then I took a math course. And remember, I was the guy in high school. I couldn't understand math. I couldn't understand calculus. What is X tends to 0? It was magical gobbledygook. And I took my first calculus course at university, Professor Klambauer. And he said, you don't need to understand limits to understand calculus. Let me give you an example. As water flows through a pipe, as the pipe necks down, the pressure goes up and the velocity goes up. That's what calculus. I said, you mean that's what calculus is? Something changes with respect to a change in something else. And he says, yeah, that's all it is. And then that unleashed me. All of a sudden, because I'm a plumber, I knew water and pipes. And if you neck down the diameter, flow rate goes up. So math was just the thing. Calculus was the thing, the tool that explained what we saw. It was what I could feel in my hands. And then all of a sudden, my next physics course, my next biology course, the anatomy courses, and then into the more medical side of things, neurology, it all just flowed together. And then I was away. That was the unification of that. So that's what I started in university. And I have a funny Penn State story to tell you.
Yeah.
So remember, this was in the 70s, no internet. And I had heard the best biomechanics school was Penn State University. And I knew about the Penn State football team and, wow. So I got on the Greyhound, went down to Toronto, got on the Greyhound bus. And in those days, you could cross the border without a passport. Got to Erie, Pennsylvania, took the Greyhound from Erie to State College, went to the biomechanics lab and met with Professor Dick Nelson, who was this, world's best at biomechanics, it seemed. And I just showed up and I said, well, I'd like to be a graduate student here. And he looked at me and he said, well, we only take PhD students. We don't take master's students. And I'd just taken the Greyhound from Canada to come to this. And then the funny part of the story is the hotel on campus is the Nittany Lion Inn, I believe. Mm-hmm. And, again, how naive I was coming down here from Canada. I went into the Nittany Lion Inn and the woman at the front desk said, okay, well, one night is going to be X amount of money. I can't remember what it was, but say it was $150 back in those days because it was a nice hotel. I didn't have $150 in my pocket. So I excused myself, went to the washroom and crept out the back. And that night I went to the Rathskeller Hotel. I had a Rolling Rock beer. And then I went and slept in the bowling alley because it was the only place open all night. I slept under the seats in the bowling alley and no one bothered me. Mm-hmm. And then got back. I was hitchhiking out to the airport. And then the guy said, well, I'm headed back. I can get you almost to Erie. So I hitchhiked to Erie and got on a Greyhound from there with what money I had. So that was my foray into biomechanics and Penn State.
Well, it's an interesting story because I can relate to a lot of it because I grew up with everybody basically telling me I'm stupid and all these other things, and it took one intervention by one person to say one thing that changed everything. And then when I found topics, and subjects in school that I actually liked, I became a way better student, it's a weird thing because you grow up your whole life thinking that you're not, because that's what everybody told you. Yeah. But then you find out that you are. And for me, it still messes with my brain just a little bit, to kind of think back on that, because I could have applied myself better, but I didn't have the catalyst to be able to do that. because I didn't have the one coach say, you're not stupid, you're just lazy. It was a different story for me, where had that conversation not happened, it would have, I think, fate intervenes anyhow. So it would have happened at some point in time with somebody else, but you could have just went all through university just only concerned about football and hockey.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had this conversation before a few years ago at dinner. And I mean, you told this story in Under the Bar. Mm-hmm. And I wish more young kids would read that book who have the same feelings as you and I did. And if they could only come here as I have done today, and you've done well. You've done very well.
I can say the same back to you. I mean, you're like the back guy. I mean, it's just, you know what I'm saying? It's you look where, and I think it's a huge lesson. It's a huge thing that for anybody that's listening should take seriously, because if somebody labels you one thing, it doesn't mean it's true. Right. Especially in today's world where, it's harder for that. But there's also more access to people that can have positive influence that are out there. And so I have faith in the future in some fashion and not in others, because of that, because more people like that are needed, because the more and the older I get, the more you find the similar story amongst all different professions. Then you start to realize that the so-called smart people in the high school or junior high, somebody once told me that A students work for B students that work for C students that work for companies owned by D students. So that doesn't mean that they're D students their whole entire life, but it's that catalyst that makes the biggest difference, because then all of a sudden you develop confidence. But then there's purpose behind I never had purpose behind what I was learning. Like, what is this? I don't care. Yeah. Like, all I care about is training. This makes no sense. But then when it started to actually relate to training, like if I could do this, then I know the other people I train with don't know this. So then I can know this and kind of move forward with that.
Yeah. And it's funny because I don't think I've shared the intricacies of what it was like for me to go to the certification courses out in Buffalo that year. I was working in a school as a guidance counselor, and I found myself connecting more with the students. I had a dumbbell and a kettlebell in my office, and I would just make them hold it and pick it up. And I noticed that they were able to open up more, and it was more of a confidence thing for them. I'd take them around school for walks. I would play basketball with them, get them moving. And I knew from that point I needed to make a change. So I was a personal trainer on the side, and I had an athlete that I was working with that had a severe lower back injury. He ended up diving on a baseball field, scorpioning his heels up to his head. Like it was bad. So I didn't know anything about really how to help him. And I started doing some research, and I kept seeing McGill on everything. And I was like, well, who is this guy? And why is he everywhere? So I bought all your material, and I started implementing my version, like my thoughts and how I interpreted things. And he ended up going from not being able to walk to playing collegiate baseball, which he was convinced he would never play again. So I knew from that point, I was like, this is something special. I want to be a part of it. And I was on the wait list for Buffalo. And I got a call a couple days before saying this spot opened up. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't expect to actually be able to get in. And I was like, I'm putting this on a credit card. Like, I'm putting all the expenses on a credit card. I didn't have the money at the time. And I made the trip. And I was so intimidated walking into that room, because I think my badge said like coach or something. Like it was a different badge than everybody else. And I was comparing myself to a room full of physical therapists, chiros, just clinical professionals. And I remember in that class, it was me, and I'm still friends with him, Clem, who was the head tennis coach for a team, one of the teams in Canada. And I was like, I just sat next to him. I was like, I don't know any of this. This is wild. This stuff is so scary to me. And I found that through that, the confidence I built, and just to be able to be a part of that process and understand that again. And I've kind of a similar background with Dave, is like, I was told like, oh yeah, I mean, you're a pretty good student, but you're not going to be, you know, a scholar. You're not going to be whatever. So I had that chip in my shoulder going in, where I was like, you know what, I'm going to keep doing this thing. I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to keep building. I'm going to keep growing and try to be a better coach for the people. At the time, I didn't even know about becoming a practitioner. I had no idea. All I wanted was more information. And it was amazing to go through that process and looking back and be like, what was I scared of? Right?
Now I have to tell you something. When I was a professor, of course, we ran the laboratories and we had the research clinic. And students would come and say, oh, well, can I work in your lab or clinic? And can we volunteer? And I say, well, no, you can't. I never take volunteers. I will pay you. But with that pay comes a commitment that you need to do the job, and you have to do it well. But we're going to pay you. And then we'd have a conversation. And if they got the highest marks in the class, chances are I wouldn't take them. The pattern that goes around that are, they tend to be more unidimensional people. They study. They don't do other things. That's not of real interest to me. I want a personality that when they, doing research and dealing with pain people, it's tough. And you're confronted with problems that you can either say, oh, go over to see that fellow and he'll give you a pain pill, or no, we have a problem and we're going to investigate it and we're going to keep working on why did you fail the previous 10 attempts to get your back better? What were the impediments? We have to deal with those. Otherwise we'll fail as well. So I need the personality that there's the problem. They're going to either bust through it, they're going to go around it, they're going to leap over it, but some way they're going to get through it. So that's what I look for. And I actually asked a few people about you before you were certified, just so you know.
Okay.
Because if I was looking for that personality, and I didn't know you at that time, but I was told, no, Sam. In fact, I can even tell you, Joel Proskovitz spoke so highly of you after that. And that's why you're a certified McGill clinician.
Well, I appreciate it.
There you go.
No, but you make a good point, you know, that they have to be problem solvers.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that involves looking outside of a traditional box, you know, into a much larger box. And some people just don't have the capacity to do that. You know,
or they might have a really good capacity to know the right answer on a multiple choice question.
Yes.
But that's not life.
Yes.
You integrate all the information and figure out a strategy on how you're going to make a difference in this person's life. Anyway, there you go, Sam.
At what point did you decide to specialize in low back, or spine?
That was pure serendipity. So I went on to do a master's degree in biomechanics, not really realizing what it was. I just saw a book in the library, biomechanics. Oh, mechanics, physics, anatomy, that seems like kind of interesting stuff. Well, where can I go if I can't go to Penn State? University of Ottawa I was into road cycling by this time, and they had the Gatineau Hills. And I thought, I could ride my bike over there. Anyway, I went, and then they said, well, we don't let people from University of Toronto with your background in here. You got to do a year of engineering first. That was the hardest year of my life, I can tell you that. I had to do the core of engineering in those first terms. I failed every midterm. My first term there, I thought I was dirt. And I went to all the tutorials with the tutorial leaders, and somehow, there was another fella lived in my residence, a guy named Griffith Inch. He was an older fella as well, and wanted to be a musician, and found that he wasn't going to make it as a musician. So as a senior student, he came back and took engineering, but he was in electrical engineering. I was mechanical. anyway, he helped me. What's a trig identity? I didn't even know. Some of the Z transform in calculus, the things he would coach me through. And I did okay on the final exams and got some good grades. But my supervisor played hockey on the university professor's hockey team. And it was a good team. In the Quebec League, it's a fairly competitive team. So they recruited a few graduate students. I was one of them. And we had this one player from University of Waterloo. We played them. And I sat beside him in the dressing room afterwards having a beer. And he said, come on to University of Waterloo. I want to show you my laboratory. And that's how he said, I'm just starting spine biomechanics. So that's the dumb, serendipitous answer. And you mentioned those few people in your life that made a difference. It was just him saying that in a sweaty hockey dressing room. Yeah. That he turned into a fabulous mentor. And he was the guy who turned me into a scientist. How do you conduct science? How do you ask the right questions? And going off topic here a little bit, I was never the traditional scientist in that, you formulate a hypothesis, you come up with a statistical design, you exercise the experiment and try and get statistical significance. Honestly, I hated that. I was the guy who said, give me the fastest man in the world. I'm going to take every instrumentation we have and I'm going to probe him and I'm going to find out what makes him the fastest. Who's the strongest? Who's the most lethal combat athlete? Who's the best tennis player? Who's the best? You'll love this one. Who just won Poker Stars in Vegas? What does that guy have? What does he see? And I remember putting cards in my hand and he was guessing them pretty well. And I said, how did you know? And I tried to keep my game face on. And it was the depth of my breathing that gave it away. And it was just, anyway, so losing my train of thought. The hypothesis testing and conducting science. I just wanted to explore all these things and see what I could find out about the extent of human performance ability. So that's what I did. I wasn't a hypothesis tester. And the other thing, and I hope I get to make this point at Swiss this weekend, how do you read a research paper? Because I see these kids on social media, I read this paper, posture doesn't matter for this, or this kind of strength training, it doesn't matter for that. And they've read a study, and on average in the study, the result was 0. And I've done experiments like that. Let's take a volleyball team, and the coach says, I want you, Mr. Strength, to increase their vertical jump 3 inches. Away you go. Okay, well, let's do a squat program. Everyone's going to get a squat program. Do you know I did this experiment twice? Half the team increased their vertical height after this same squat training program. 30% of the team lost height off their vertical jump after the squat training program. 20% were non-responders. On average, no difference. So that's what you read in the paper. Squat training does not increase your vertical jump. The gold was in the variance. Half of them were responders. 20% were super responders. 20% were non-responders, and 30% were negative responders. Now what's the difference? And I learned some just beautiful stuff. I learned to say to the kids, and every kid knows this answer. Are you naturally quick or are you naturally strong? Okay, quick over here, strong over here. You just found out who the responders were. Who do you think the strength training of squats increased their vertical jump? You have a guess?
Naturally strong?
No.
Or the opposite?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have a quick neurology, we're going to talk about powerlifting now that my brain has gone there in just a minute. But if you're naturally quick and you add strength, boom, you're even higher on the vertical jump. If you add strength to strength, it tends to slow you down a little bit. So you might get stronger in a powerlifting squat, but it will tend to take some height off your explosive vertical jump. And as it turned out, I also asked the question, arrange yourself tallest to shortest, and the players would. And then I said, sit down and repeat. And now the order changed. So what we just measured was your leg length to torso length ratio. And as you know, for squat mechanics, the longer the leg, the more hip dominant a jumper you are. You know, like the tall NBA players, they're hip jumpers. The players who are knee jumpers tend to be shorter in the leg and longer in the body. So it's leg power. Quite a different mechanic. But I'm going to show some. Can I carry on?
Yes, most definitely. Because I think this is important, because what this kind of reminds me of is, Eric had the emailing list for a long period of time, and he'd blast out, research papers by the hundreds, right? And he would always find something that was in there. Like, so you would read the summary and be like, okay, this is what that is. But then he would show something. And I'm like, I never would have, but it wasn't what it was, right? If you were just to read the summary, it wasn't that, because these variables were either not accounted for,
right?
There's definitely a skill to reading that. Right. So I'm just like, I just use Eric, or use a stick to the meta analysis, or ask other people, because it's tricky, man. It's really, really tricky when you're dealing with things like that. And there's only so many controllable factors, and they're not going to tell you the factors that aren't controllable. There's a lot that feed into that. So yes, I can carry on.
Yeah.
Because I think this
I used
is
to
important.
teach a grad course on how to interpret science. And you mentioned some magic words there, control. And you can't control everything. And sometimes there are just natural experiments that occur in populations, and it was naturally controlled. But nonetheless, I'm going to talk about some power lifters this weekend. And the goal is to create strength density. So strength starts as a thought. And the great men and women of strength use tricks to densify that thought, convert them into pulse trains, send them down the nerves that have to be conditioned, and there's some tricks to do that, and then convert the pulse train at the muscle level into strength, and then to tune the body with strategic stiffness and mobility to allow the desired movement. So it's a hell of a train going through. But the tricks to densify neural drive to the erector spinae muscle. If you do a maximum effort deadlift, and I've measured some of the best deadlifters on this planet, both men and women, and I can get about 65 or 70% peak neural drive in a deadlift. You got to do something else. You got to move the spine slightly, but that's not a good idea under heavy load. You're going to get hurt. Or you move very quickly. Neither are really powerlifting. So I'm showing a few clips of Brian Carroll just blasting, I think it's 650 pounds off the floor. So it's that speed that drives the neural density. And I remember Bill Kazmaier years ago. I have to digress just a tiny bit. So the brain organizes the neuromuscular compartments of the erector spinae. If you believe some of the physical therapists, you try and swell up your multifidus and move laterally into longissimus and then into iliacostalis. This is neurologically impossible. The brain doesn't organize activating your back muscles that way. The neuromuscular compartments are up and down the spine. So that's what our science showed. And I remember years ago with Bill Kazmaier, he would work over the end of a bench. I wish we could workshop some of this stuff with the gorgeous equipment here, but just do a little cantilevered extension with the cantilever here and just slightly move, pulling a kettlebell or something heavy, and then change the position of the fulcrum down a little bit. And with your brain and the mechanics, move the effort a few segments down and repeat the micro movements. And in other words, you're educating the brain as to where all the neuromuscular compartments are up and down the spine. And here was Kaz, and I said to him, And I said, this is a long time ago. How did you know that that's the way the brain organizes your back muscles? And he said, Stu, he says, I only knew what worked. And that was magic.
Mm-hmm.
Here was the guy, strongest man at the time. And he found it out because it worked. And a skinny old man like myself found it out because that's what I was measuring.
Mm-hmm.
And then the two worlds came together. And then, of course, that really helped. And then, again, Kaz, not to talk too much about him, but I think we've had this conversation before, Dave, where you cannot have a strength thought while you're happy. You cannot do it. We've talked to so many athletes who I had the next world record. I'd done say it's a clean and jerk. I've done the clean. I got the next world record. I allowed a little internal satisfaction, a little smile internally in my brain. Shut down neural drive. You lost it. So, at a power meet, the various strategies that the lifters have to get into that very dark place that can generate those very dense neurological thoughts of strength. And then you get a guy like Kaz who he says, well, I don't think dark, I'm light. I get the power of the Lord to invade my body and supernatural things occur. He's the only guy who can do it with that. But you watch him and he thinks, and the sweat beads start to appear on his forehead.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's potentiating and getting into the zone. But everyone else I know does it through a going to such a dark place that, for lack of a better word, they have to override every natural fuse box in their brain that's telling them, please don't do this. And they commit a homicidal act on their own body to express that strength.
Well, that would bring up the question to me that if they're doing that too frequently in their training, too much of one thing can be damaging.
There's no question.
So that it's I would be controlled chaos is kind of how I would explain that. If they're doing it for they're not going to do it for their warm up sets and all the other kind. But if they're doing it for too many lifts, then they're not going to recover because of their nervous system or whatever, them not being able to do that. So there's layers or levels, right? So there's the level that, for myself personally, there's a level to meet that would be completely different than a level in training. When I go to that one certain level, I'm throwing up afterwards. I mean, it's a very hard thing to recover from. But advanced strength athletes, I think they find where the balance is. Like, here's the place you have to be for training, but then here's a even higher state, which needs to be balanced based upon your recovery and how you can recover from that. But it still needs to be there. The anger state or whatever you want to call it for the top sets. But there's the anger state, then there's the serial killer state, which there's a little difference between those two. And what I find is the ones that first off can figure this out, because many just don't figure it out. And they need to be technically inclined before they actually start to really do it anyhow, or they're just going to miss a lift in a very catastrophic way. Then have to learn how to balance, just how dark that becomes. Does that make sense?
It's some lifters, as you know, get into a lot of personal trouble going to that state and not knowing how to handle it. Go to the best you've ever lifted in your life. I'm assuming it'll be at a meet. How long afterwards were you affected?
A month.
Yeah. I wish more younger people would hear this. They think they have their personal best and they don't realize they're not even close. They don't know what it is to be a super athlete. And then the super athlete pulls that off. You can talk to the GOAT, Ed Cohn.
Yeah.
Ed would set And he limited himself on the number of personal bests he would set in a year.
Yeah.
What was it, maybe 2?
Mhm.
And, you say to a kid these days, you do a personal best, let your body settle in and adapt to that whole experience for the next half a year. It's going to take a toll.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, they're chasing their next personal best next week. Well, son, you weren't even close.
Yeah. Well, I found the most vulnerable I was to injury was the 4 to 6 weeks after a meet.
Right.
So you learn that the hard way.
Yeah.
Then after a while, it's like, okay, this is down regulation time, hypertrophy time, restore mobility, just get a bar off your back, things like that. Just chill and understand you're going to get weaker, but you're probably going to get weaker anyhow, right? Because if you're using PEDs, it's going to change those too, but a lot of lifters have a hard time coping. And actually, the better they get, they begin to understand it a little bit more, because what matters to them the most is what happens on the platform. So they don't want to compromise what's going to happen in the next one, over a period of time, or they end up learning the hard way, as Brian did, just finding ways to hack the system to be able to get through to the next one. And then that hacking the system becomes habit. It's who were we talking? I was just talking to somebody the other day about this, that you find ways to kind of like hack the recovery, then it just becomes your standard practice. And then over a period of a few years, everything you've been doing to hack that recovery is no longer working anymore. And, something breaks.
Right. And even after my meet, I'm about in that time frame, that 4 to 6 weeks out from a meet or past a meet. And I was talking to Travis about this just on the phone. I was like, man, like everything just feels drained. Like I almost felt depressed. It was like the blues kind of set in. And honestly, up until like last week, I was just like, is there something wrong? But I didn't realize how much of a drive that I committed to that day, because it was out in Las Vegas. So there was travel. There was, my girlfriend competed a couple days before. It was just so much physical, but also like emotional toll. So many ups and downs and lefts and right that it took me. I'm still recovering from it. Right.
Yeah. Well, a meet's different too, because there's 3 lifts, where while I was training with Louis, I had a nickname Zippy because I would go to a different place, for the heavier lifts. And he was the one to point out, Dave, you only have 2 Zippy cards you can play, so that's it. So if you play those cards however you want during the training week. So it can be, one for max effort squat, one for the bench, but you can't play more than 2. And then when you go to a meet, then you're actually playing like 4, because if I played over 2, then it was going to impact. If it was a Monday, max effort Monday, if I'd played over 2, Wednesday was host, Friday was host, because it was too much. Where it made sense to me that here's these cards, so I can only go there. And then the stronger I got, the less I had to use them, because then I got to a point I realized I don't have to be in training at that state that frequently, because recovery, getting to the meet healthier meant more than the training did.
Right.
Because I realized the healthier I can go into a meet, the better I can display my strength. Right. So if and this is true with any top power lifter, this is the advice I give all of them, is the healthier person typically always wins. Even if you're 100 pounds, 200 pounds less on the total, the other person, if they're not healthy, is not going to be able to display their strength. Because what you display on a platform still isn't really your top level strength. Competitions just don't work that. Right. Maybe one, it's 1 or 2 in your whole career is like Caddyshack, when the guy's, everything's going great, but then he ends up getting killed, by lightning at the end. But that's a neural component of that, which I would say it's good. I mean, if you feel that way, then it's good, because I would say your training peaked, what you displayed on that day for that day was at a high level. And then you're just going to take the ramifications that come with that, understanding that that's normal, right? Because those that don't understand it's normal, have a hard time with it.
Yeah.
And then the ones that have the harder time are the ones that try to hack through it.
And that's when the ego can get in the way too. So if you don't hit the number you wanted to meet, like
Sure.
you had said, the next 4 to 6 weeks, they'll be like, oh, well, what if I just test this? Or what if I just do this? And then that's when they get into trouble.
Sure.
For sure.
My wife's a sports psychology consultant, and we have these conversations all the time. And tapering is huge. And then post-competition is huge. And then to repeat it all again. And those cycles are different for every person.
Well, that brings up a different topic there, because a lot of the lifters that you'll see are on the back end of their career, right? So they're also...
Oh, you mean me as a spine guy?
Yeah, as a spine guy. So they're on the back end of their career. So they're also mentally kind of dealing with this. I might be done. It might be over. There's an identity crisis that's going to play into all this. There's a lot of other things that are playing into it to where it could affect their compliance. Like I can't not lift for 6 months because I may only have 2 years left. But then, if you follow them long enough, it becomes 3 years and 4 years and 5 years. And it's just more and more damage that's associated with that. Where I've said a number of times, the most impressive thing with Brian to me, because I knew him, I was sponsoring him at the time, I knew everything he was doing to mitigate the damage beforehand, which was a lot. And he's been transparent about it.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Spinal injections every week is probably not a good idea, but to him, it was how to get through it.
Right.
The most impressive thing that he did was not train for whatever that X period of time was. It was like 3 or 4 months. And we had a gathering of training session at Orlando Barbell during this time period. And everybody's like maxing out. I mean, it's just doing what powerlifters do. And he doing the bird dogs and planks. I mean, and we're all busting his ass about this, man. It's just like, come on, and never got sucked in. And Brian's one of the biggest shit talkers.
Oh, please.
I mean, it's, you have no idea. Like, go back 10 years, right? So of course we all see this as like the door's open, man, and it's coming hard. And he just stuck to it, and for a long time. And, after that, he kind of went his own way and I went my own way. And we had a little bit of a falling out during that time period, but I still followed everything that he did because I know how important that total was for him to do. But it wasn't just that. I knew everything that he went through, with you, to be able to get back on the platform, which still impresses me more than any of the numbers that he lifted.
Yeah.
Because I've seen more lifters than not be able to do that. And the great thing about him is I can say, look at his story, read his book. This is openly available. And if he can do it, then you can too, or it's about something else with you.
Right.
When you first saw him, he wouldn't be the first one that you saw. Did you think that he was going to be compliant?
I didn't think you were going to ask quite that question in that way. Yes, I did, because it was a very emotional session that first time I ever met him. We probably met for about 5 hours.
Yeah.
And I felt his earnest sincerity and his I don't know, I'm just struggling for words here. It was an internal honesty. And yeah, I did think he was going to comply. And but he also told me in that first session, he says, yep. And all I promised him was, it wasn't outcome. It was, all I can give you is my best effort. And I said, I think I can get you out of pain. That was it. And he said, oh, okay. Well, when I'm out of pain, I want my world record back, because in the meantime, someone else had taken it.
Yeah.
And This story's been told many times, but I just sort of tossed it off. I said, well, if you can set a world record again, we can write a book about that one.
Yeah, I mean, no.
And he held my feet to the fire.
I would have been in the same camp with that. Like, there's just no way.
No, I didn't. So that's where I thought you were going to go with the question.
Mm-hmm.
So I never thought he would get back and set the all-time squat record. I did think he had a chance to get better, but people may or may not realize he was pretty damaged.
No, it was bad.
It was bad. Yeah, it was.
And I knew the pain that he was going, you know, I'm witness to all this, and it was bad.
Yeah.
And he showed me the imaging, right? And I don't know a whole lot about the imaging, but I know that didn't look good.
Yeah.
It looked bad, you know, and I also knew that he wasn't done, you know, so in his brain, it wasn't like, I'm going to retire. Let's just fix this and get out of pain. He had unfinished business, which plays into that, why I respect what he did so much more than that, because I don't know very many other people.
Yeah, that's all true. Do you want to comment as things are popping into my mind from that first session? He was in pain, and here is one of the best squatters on this planet, and he would flop onto a chair like a rag doll. And I thought, come on now, you're the best squatter in the world. So it's up to me to tell you how to squat onto a chair and get off that chair, and we'll get up on the exam table and whatnot. But, you know, I go back to Dave Tate 101, you know, that shortstop squat, pull your hips through. Oh, he goes, oh, yeah, that doesn't hurt.
There you go.
There you go. Okay. We got to start. Let's carry on. And, okay, let's take the casualness out of your movements, make them very purposeful. And let's see how in this 5 hours we can get through to moving without triggering pain. And I think that showed him that there was hope at that time. So that was very important to leave that first session with a short demonstration. You know, there's some validity here. Let's just keep it going. But I agree with you. The strength of mind and character is very important. And he told me what you guys tried to do to him in Orlando. And I just said, keep the faith, Brian. Well, you're making progress here.
After that day, I knew whatever that this was different.
Yeah.
Because we were brutal, man.
With the fracturing of bone, the only thing you can do there is hope a callus forms. And do you want to talk about mechanostimulation for powerlifters?
Yeah.
Because it's very different than for bodybuilders and other people of strength. So just to cover off, how does the bony fracture heal? I've just got to talk about how bone remodels. So if you take a long bone and you bend the long bone, this surface goes into tension and this surface goes into compression, bending the bone. If you're ever a kid and you got two pieces of quartz crystal, you could get that rock at night in the black, and you could do that and you'd see a lightning flash, and then you could scrape it and create lightning through the quartz crystal because it's piezoelectric. So the property of a piezoelectric crystal is that when you deform it quickly, it creates an electric charge. Bone is a piezoelectric material. It's made up of ions of calcium, magnesium in a lattice that forms a crystalline structure. So you bend the bone, and you know, people will take a kick at animal research. This was all discovered on turkey wings, funded by NASA to create bone loss, to mitigate bone loss among astronauts who are spending time in space. So they took turkeys and they would bend the wings and measure this osteogenic crystalline process that I'm trying to describe. So the charge develops on the bone at the point of the highest strain. Perfect. That's the intelligence of how the system knows to create the charge. Now the free ions of calcium and magnesium that are floating in the plasma and the blood, they get sucked in and chemically bound. Now, a bodybuilder, you're trying to micro tear down muscle and over the next day fuel it, rest it, and get a adaptive response hypertrophy. Do it again the day after. So 3 days a week you can train. Doesn't work with bone. So you create the chemical bond by stressing the bone. But if you train the next day, the bond isn't strong enough yet, and it will typically just break off. You need 4 or 5 days for that chemical bond to become stronger and stronger, more robust. So you're forming basically a bony scab over the fracture. And that was the key to Brian. It was called bone callousing. And, he would do his, you had a funny expression for it. The fucking seal Pilates on the ground. That was what you were telling him. That made me laugh. And then, but to do a suitcase carry with a reasonable kettlebell, 30 meters there and back, enough. Now take 5 days off. Let that stimulus to the bone callus up. And anyway, that's some of the science that went into his recovery. And I told him, Brian, you're an experiment in progress. So let's see what we can do. There's no promises here, but I don't have anything else for you. I took a cadaver and I loaded it to create the same fractured end plate pattern that he got. And the surgeons do a procedure called kyphoplasty. So you take a bore, you drill a hole in the side of the vertebra that's been fractured, and you send in a bunch of bone cement, like in a quick dry epoxy, basically, to give some integrity back to the bone. And I tried that, but it didn't seal the disc. It was still leaking through the fracture. And I filmed all these experiments that we did. So, this sort of natural bone callousing mechanostimulation was all that we could come up with. And thank God it worked. Does it work every time? Yeah. No.
Well, that's what I was going to say with other lifters of his caliber that have come to you. There's ones that it's helped and other ones that it hasn't helped.
Correct.
What are the reasons that you could say are why it didn't help for some of the others?
The answer is I don't know. There's a bunch of possibilities. The fracture just wouldn't seal up is one. And so now all you're left with is just a natural gristling process that the nucleus of the disc, it originally in its pristine form, uninjured form, is a gel. And when it sees the immune system from the blood and whatnot, it turns to crab meat. And that crab meat just gets stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. And that in of itself will stiffen a joint sufficient so you're out of pain. Are you going to squat 1,300 pounds? No. So there's one possible explanation. Most elite lifters don't come to me with that. It's usually much more collagen damage to the wall of the disc. So when a typical lifter, they start out with a little bit of end plate fracturing, perhaps from an excessive deadlift that is beyond their current capacity, and they keep training. And instead of allowing the bone callousing to occur, so a fracture, I should be very clear on this, a fracture can be a good thing. A microfracture, if I was to do an MRI or even a plain film x-ray of your spine, we would see sclerotic end plates. So the radiologist would write, oh, DT, you've got sclerotic end plates. He doesn't know whether you're an old guy buckled over. He doesn't know anything about you. All he did was read the scans. And that sclerotic end plate is what you adapted through mechanostimulation as a strength athlete. Mm-hmm. So you never allowed the micro trauma to run ahead of the rate of the bone callousing that you did naturally. Because I know you didn't train every other day. You were, I know how you guys trained. So that was your adaptation. It's not a pathology. And there's all kinds of medical literature. Weightlifters and powerlifters show damage to their spines long before the symptoms occur. Well, no kidding. They're also adapting strength, which is to have. Now, the price you pay is you lose some of the elasticity. But that's what you're doing. You're adapting in that way. But once the end plate starts to microfracture, the collagen fibers, so the disc of your spine, it's not a ball and socket joint, it's actually a fabric. So if I wanted to delaminate the fibers of my shirt, I would create stress strain reversals back and forth like this, and the fibers would slowly work apart. Well, if I was containing a liquid or a gel behind it, the liquid or gel would find its way through the delaminations. So it's more those kinds of things that the elite lifters are coming to me with. And usually it's a deloading period. And looking at their training as to what created those stress strain reversals that ran ahead of the rate of the adaptation. So that's more of what we're doing. So Brian's injury was quite special, actually. It wasn't typical of the heavy athletes. And then, I get the next athlete who is perhaps a gymnast or a dancer or someone who needs a lot of spine mobility. And when their discs bulge, they don't get posterior disc bulges from bending forward and flexing. Their collagen is now, the matrix that holds the fibers together have become so compliant and lost in stiffness that the disc now buckles, which would never happen in a strength athlete. They get the disc bulge because you're squeezing hydraulically the nucleus back. Whereas when the gymnast does that, they get a disc bulge from bending backwards. It's the opposite because the collagen buckles. It's soft. Do you see? Yeah. So the mechanostimulation and how the person organizes their programming to create the reactive adaptations really determines the subcategory that they're in. And it's subtle stuff. That's why not everybody can fix back pain. Yeah. It's pretty precise work, actually.
One of the things that I've always suggested lifters do before Brian even had his problems, and it was more because of what we talked about earlier, just how beat you get from a meet, was I have like these lists of rules, and they never do it for as long as I tell them to, but I'll tell them I don't want any bars on your back. I don't want any bars in your hands if it's an advanced lifter for 8 weeks. I don't want any repetitions under 10. And then I want the volume to drop way down, because normally if they peak for a competition and you look at the total repetitions they're doing per week leading into that competition, it might be like 200 total reps over a whole month, right? Because they're peaking and the weights are heavier and accessories are dropping out. So slowly ramp the volume back up, over a period of that time, where I was originally doing that because it also creates the opportunity for them to do a hypertrophy block, right? If they can't put a bar in their hands, I'm thinking more shoulders and stuff like that, then they're going to use dumbbells, they're going to use machines, they're going to use those other things. If they can't put the bar on their back, then they're going to have to do lunges or single leg presses or leg extensions, anything that doesn't have the spinal compression. And I've wondered after Brian's whole thing that these lifters, they're going to accumulate the microfractures and damage as they're peaking for a meet. I don't think there's really any way around that. You can structure the training with longer rest periods and stuff. It's still going to happen at a higher level because it's already kind of accumulated. Would that be enough time to be able to let those heal, for lack of a better word?
Forgive me, but I don't know if I'd agree with you
on
whether that's a fait accompli. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Look around us here. I know how you train. I know how Brian trained. I know how he peaked for his world record performance. The key there was to, yes, recognize the cumulative microtrauma in his spine, but then avoid that being the stress concentration. Distribute those stresses now throughout his body and make sure that, yes, his spine may be driven to 99% of its capability, but his hips weren't. His hips were only 80. So let's put more stress there. Let's go over to the belt squat machine and put more stress there. And so now everything is at 90%. And it's a rough game. You're going to 90%
I
everywhere.
get what you're saying. Yeah.
But what you don't want to do is walk onto the platform and be at 101% in your back and 80% in your hips.
Yeah.
That's just not expert training.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're selling yourself short there. I know what you do, and you do consciously, for lack of better words, I guess, redistribute that stress. To get it distributed throughout and don't exceed the capacity of any one element. So you do a little bit of lifting technique change, but it's programming. Add your belt squats, add some of the sled work that you were
all that comes in, but just I was more concerned with the bar on the spine,
right?
With the compression of the barbell on the spine.
Well, that I'll agree 100% with you.
Yeah. And all the other training, it is belt squats, and it's still working hard. I mean, those things still have to happen in there. It's just that straight bar and safety bars. I don't want any of the bars, to be on there, but yes, that's why there's 3 belt squats in here.
Right. Yeah, I know.
The leg press is the only one I'm like. The leg press and like a hack squat, they're the ones that I'm a little iffy on, because it is redistributing that load, but it's still there. So, and I try to do this even if it's a younger lifter, just they probably don't need it if they're 19, but they need the habit, of being able to go into some type of 2-week or whatever I can get them to do, change of training focus, for that. So they don't get to the point where they're more advanced. And then I'm trying to tell them, you need this block where you probably don't want to put this straight bar on your back. You're like, oh, I can't do that. I'm going to get weak. Like, who cares? Your next meet isn't for 6 months. Like, what difference does it make at this point?
All right. So you asked me about the mental motivation side of all of this. How are you going to handle that 19-year-old now who he's not convinced and he's afraid of getting weak, but you're telling him, no, your body needs this over the long term to ultimately be the athlete you want to be. So how do you?
It's a balance, because when they're at that age, I don't expect them to listen very much, right? So it's out there, but I'm not going to offer unsolicited advice. If they're going to go off and do their stupid stuff, they're going to do their stupid stuff. I'll just let them learn from their mistakes and control what I can control. Because when they're at that level, ultimately you want to build trust with them, to be able to take care of the bigger things. And when they're that young, they can almost get away with anything. So it's really hard to convince them when everything that they're doing could be wrong, but they're still making progress. So then what things can I convince them on to at least start to develop that relationship? So if it is something like that, then maybe I need to shift towards, what are you eating? Just something, that kind of plays into there, because eventually they're going to run into a rut. They're not going to make any progress, so they almost need to get there. And then when they get to that point, then it's more, let's look at how to periodize the lift and so forth. So I'm not going to try to beat things into them that they're not going to be willing to receive. And it's pretty easy to tell, who will and who won't.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I guess sometimes you just have to let them, sounds crazy to say, but you have to let them hurt themselves a little bit. And then all of a sudden now you've got their attention. Yeah. Yeah. I find that's true with some people.
Yeah, I mean, they have to make
so
mistakes.
Locked on,
right?
But others, and look who's talking. You have to learn by your mistakes.
Yeah, you do, and they do as well. So you just want the mistakes to not be catastrophic,
right?
So a lot of leeway unless it's something like you're like, oh no, this is no, this is bad.
Isn't that like parenting? You sort of have to let them go and just hope they don't kill themselves.
It is. It's pretty much exactly the same thing, but less evasive because they're not my kids.
Yeah.
So here it's just that. But then the time that I'm going to invest in the globally overall is going to be way less, with that person, because it's just falling on deaf ears. I know this, I was that person, so I think that's what a lot of coaches seem to forget is when you end up being the guy on the other side of the table, because people were telling me all these things when I was younger. I'm like, hey, you fucking old man, just shut up. What do you squat? You haven't squatted shit I was that person, so as long as you can keep the lines of communication open for when they're ready to receive, then you're further ahead. But when you forget what it was like to be that person, then it's harder, because then you're just trying to force feed them. And what it's going to do is drive them away. Right. And then they're going to end up doing even dumber things someplace else.
Well, I even think like pain itself is just a lesson learned really quickly, right? If something tweaks, I'm like, okay, not going to do that again, or I have to modify, I have to adjust. But even with like the assessment process is like, I'll run into people, and Dr. McGill can kind of talk about this too, is we really figure out what is causing their pain. And their pain has almost become a part of their personality.
Yes.
So when they start to feel better, they look for it. They try to find it. They don't know what to do. It's a very emotionally turbulent place to be, especially if it's been years and years of them being in pain.
Yeah. See, now you're talking about an older lifter.
Right.
That's a different conversation, because that older lifter that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Right? Because their identity is wrapped around all this, and they're not ready to let that go. And I don't know if they need to, because if they're striving to be the best, it probably needs to be a big part of their identity. But there's fear associated with that too, because, they're injured. They want to come back, but then it's a reoccurring, and the back is probably one of the most common.
And I even think for younger athletes, I think there's a certain amount of fear there that if they're not doing the thing at the maximum intensity every single time they step into the gym, they are going to get weaker. They're going to get worse.
Yeah.
I mean, the examples that we have here, you can tell there's almost like two different camps of the younger athletes that want to push as hard as they can every time they step into the gym versus the younger athletes that are starting to kind of understand and put faith in the information that you give them.
Oh yeah.
And the progress you see.
And I've seen this happen enough times that I can tell you who's going to win at the end.
Right.
It's always the one that's the slower one, that's taking the time, that's not in that rush and that hurry. And they're rare. They're very rare. But when I see that, I invest hard.
Yeah.
In that, because now those conversations are a little bit different too, because they want to be stronger just like everybody else.
Absolutely.
But technique matters. All these other pieces of the puzzle matter. And eventually the fast gainers, whatever you want to call them, are going to run into a sticking point. They're not going to know how to overcome it because they've never had one. So they never had that adversity. The other person may have already overcome 5, 6 sticking points just to squat 315. Where the other one, first sticking point they had was at 600.
Right.
This 315 one over a stretch of a decade always wins.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like the Mr. Miyagi thing of wax on, wax off. And all of a sudden, Kung Fu after a while, all these different movements. And it's having people in your corner that you can trust with the process and just understanding that it is a process as opposed to a sprint.
Yes. And there's not a quick fix.
No.
Where I think that's probably what you run into. Like a lot of these lifters will reach out to you and they want the quick fix.
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. But it's usually the ones who've just failed so many times and now they're at the end of their rope. They say they haven't been willing to be patient enough to let go of all of the psychological roadblocks that you just described. And now they say, okay, I'm ready to accept what you have to say.
Because I mean, you said many times you can't rush physiology, right? If they,
yeah, no, that's Mother Nature sets rules, and some of them you are forced to live by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's been an absolute just game changer in not only my coaching career, but my life in general, to be a part of your team in this process. Because one of the things that I think is so overlooked is that assessment process in terms of other people, and even clinicians that aren't part of the process, is they think they can diagnose something in 5 minutes, or they only give someone that's in pain just a few minutes to really, express themselves. And they're like, just take this pill or do this thing or stretch this and do that. The biggest game changer for me was when I was learning at that certification. It's like understanding how important it is to go into a situation, start the assessment as they walk out of the car, see how they move, see their demeanor. You talked about doing the pen test of dropping a pen on the ground and having them pick it up. You're constantly gaining information, constantly gaining that insight into not only where they are now, but where they were coming from in their thought process. And you've talked about it quite a bit, of the personality of that person plays a tremendous role in how you work together to develop that plan and how you execute the plan. Because if you're working with a top tier, essentially a top fuel dragster, you're going to have to worry about more of the braking. Like you have to slow them down, versus someone who's a little bit, less go, go, go. You may have to punch the gas a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. Every person is a system that I have to study and figure out what it is they need to be pain-free, or what it is they need to perform at their particular sport. So what are the demands of their sport? What are the demands that they are going to have to meet to become pain-free and have a capacity to get back to training for their sport? It's you not everybody can do this. Could I teach someone else to be Sam Brown and
oh no
assess a person so that at the end of the assessment you know what the demands they're going to have to meet, you know where they currently are, you've assessed that, and you have enough training savvy to know how to get them from where they currently are to a space where they can meet that demand. I often use this analogy. I don't know how many car mechanics there are in the States, but let's say say there's 30,000. I have no idea what the number is. I'll bet there's 10 who can build a car that will win Indianapolis 3 years in a row. The 15th guy can't do it. And that's the way it is in our game as well. So for me to find people who they can see movement, they can see where the stress is, they can read a people's eyes. If we create pain, I don't need to ask you, does that hurt or not? I just saw it in your eyes. Mm-hmm. I just felt the little flicker of that muscle activating in response to that pain. I can see that person has come from a place of abuse. You touch them and they just recoil. You can see in how a timid personality, you stress them a little bit and they crush their joints. Or the next person comes in and they don't give a care. I stress them and it's water off a duck's back. Okay, so now I can physically stress them. It's a never-ending effort to create your mastery, to understand that particular pathway of why that person has pain, and keep expanding your toolbox. And then to know where, I mean, I have a pretty good idea of where my limitations are. And I know when I need a manual clinician who can come in and release that quadratus lumborum snag. I've done everything else, but I don't have the skill to do that. Mm-hmm. Or I think you need to see a family counselor. here is someone who's living at home with an abusive partner. They can't do a bird dog in their living room for what that would trigger their abusive partner to engage in. So the horrible stories that you hear, and you just want to put your arm around these poor people and wish you could pull them out of that situation. That's all part of, their pain, or, and might be a young kid who's 15 years old and really has no chance for the pros. And here you have dad. Monday, they're strength training. Tuesday, they go to the gym, and then they go to the stretch coach, and then they go to the sports psychologist. The next day, they're, son, when was the last time you had a day off? And the kid looks at you as though you're from Mars. And then, you say to the dad, yeah, I don't know of an Olympic athlete who trains like this. And then sometimes, again, it's interesting to watch the child of this person. The child, for the first time, is seeing that, oh, finally, I can get relief. Someone's on my side, and I'm not going to get beaten up today by overcoaching. And obviously the parents trying to do their best, but they say, we are having a meet this week, and we got to be here. And sir, it's not we, it's your son. Just the patterns that. Anyway, assessment is, as you know, our assessments can be half an hour. It can be, you can see some people, they walk in and within a very short period of time, why they're in pain. But the next person, you have to unravel it, or something doesn't fit. I'll give you an example of a woman I saw not too long ago. You could do a physical therapy slump test on them, which is a stretch of the sciatic nerve tract below the waist, and then they slump, so you pull through the spinal cord from the head end. No symptom. And yet she says, when I drive a car, it's excruciating. And I could feel that there was something not allowing the nerve to move or floss properly here. But what was it about just extending the leg in her car? And I knew I was looking for something on the nerve. I knew it was on the L5 lumbar root. I go to the MR and I search, and then I find it. There's a Tarlov cyst on that nerve root. No one else would have ever have found that. All that they did was send her to the pain clinic, who told her, you're crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. You're a magnifier of your pain. Maybe you should have psychological counseling or something. They turned it into a psychological case by this default of not committing to understanding why this poor person had pain. Anyway, I don't know why. Well,
that kind of goes back to what Sam said earlier, is you'll find people that have identified, with their pain.
Right.
So now that is part of their identity, which becomes the whole thing you're going to have to manage and kind of work with as well. So how do you know when that's the case?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I am in Rhode Island and I see a lot of the clients up there, it's a lot of blue collar workers, right? And they, plumbers, electricians, woodworkers, handymans, and they are not the type of people that necessarily identify with their pain. They are the type of people that I've worked with that identify as hard workers. So my biggest issue that I run into with them is that they are so quick to try to get back as soon as possible. So, I just worked with somebody recently that was on workers' comp, and like they are in a bad situation because they're the breadwinner for their family. And I mean, the initial assessment lasted like 4 hours, and the guy was in tears because he was like, I can't even use the toilet without being in pain. I can't. But there was a restriction there because he was starting to, even in the session, he would start to feel a little bit better. And I could just see him like wiggling, like looking for that has always been there. And I reached out to him again about 2 weeks ago, and he goes, everything's going great. But he came up with a list of things that were still painful. And I just started asking questions. I'm like, how does this process make you feel? like knowing that you're feeling better and that he's like, this is great, but I want it to be faster. Or he was hard to let go of the sensations he's felt. And it was very eye-opening for me because he's saying all the right things, but there is an action there that is keeping him from really producing the results that he's capable of, because he also told me, he's like, oh, and then I went to the job site and I tried to do this thing. Like, he's just rushing back into it. And I asked him, I was like, because during the assessment, it was like, how long were you in pain for? He's like, oh, my back has always hurt for like 15 years. And he come to find out, he attributed hard work to his back feeling fatigued and sore. So when he can do a job and not be in pain, he doesn't feel like he's worked hard enough. It's like the younger athletes are like, oh, I have to be sore when I leave the gym. I have to be, in pain. I have to be run down. He just attributed hard work to his body being hurt. And it was eye-opening for me, because it was one of the first ones that really held on for as long as he did, because he was subconsciously holding on to that experience, because that was what hard work is for him.
They should read Peter Attia's book and then walk around light on your feet with no pain and wonder what on earth, I don't deserve to feel this good.
Well, I wonder, because what I see a lot is people will tell me their back screwed up or back hurts or whatever it is. And it's just constant, like all the time. And I'll give them, I stack of Brian's book and Back Mechanic out there. I'll give them like Brian's. It's not a hard book to read, right? So my test is, will they even read it? Right? So you can read that in an hour, right?
An afternoon.
And then the next week they're still bitching. They're still complaining. Like, well, did you read it? Well, no, I haven't. So like, what exactly are you looking for here? Right? So to me, it's like a test. Like if you can't even do that, then you really don't care about actually fixing this issue. You just like to bitch about it, right? Where you're going to see this way more than Stu's going to see it, right? Because anytime people know what you do, everybody has a back problem.
Yes.
So then they want you to fix the back problem, right? So is there anything that you'll have them do just to see if they actually will be willing to do what they're supposed to do?
Honestly,
you can't do a 4-hour consult until you know if they actually really want it to be better.
So one of the tools that I use is I'm like, okay, grab yourself a notebook or a journal, and I want you to write down as much information as possible. The situations that it hurts, situations that feels good, your positions where you find relief, the stress level of the day. Just gain as much insight. And I'm like, I want to come back into the gym in a week and we can kind of go over this and we can talk about it, and then we can go into any sort of assessment. I would say 6 times or 7 times out of 10, I never hear back from them. It's like they weren't even willing to address or even just bring to light the things that they were feeling and to make them real. Right. And it's eye-opening, because I'm like, well, if you didn't want to even write down just a simple note, I wouldn't even say do it on your phone. Like every time you put yourself in a position where you're feeling the sensation, like describe what the sensation is and what the position you were in and what you were doing. And that's usually one of the biggest things is when they're not willing to even, it's like a nutrition client, right? Yeah. It's like, you need to know what you're eating before we can make adjustments. It's like, we need to know what you're doing before we can even have those deeper conversations. Because even when a client comes in, it's like, I don't know what the answer is going to be. Like I'm there to collect information. I'm trying to collect the information from their experiences, any sort of imaging they have, any sort of information that they can give me. But then I'm trying to dig deeper, and I'm trying to be like, okay, well, what's the stress like in your life? Like, what's your job? Like, what do you do? Like, explain to me what your job looks like every hour of that workday. Like, what are you doing? I would love to hear that. Do you drive to work? What's your mattress like? It's just, do you have pain when you go to the bathroom? Do you have pain when you get up in the morning? Do you, like, what time of day do you train? It's like, there's so much that goes into these things that if they're not willing to kind of meet me at a certain point, it's like, I probably won't hear from them again.
Oh, you see, in my life, those are the same people that end up getting surgery later.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, now you're going to have to recover from the surgery. So how long is that going to take? Like, they could have just taken the 8 to 12 weeks
right
to actually do the other stuff first. They're still going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I explain that, they don't get it.
Yeah.
So any answers to that one?
Well, yeah, that's a chapter in our book, and we call it virtual surgery. So surgery works on back pained people a surprisingly amount of the time because it's forced rest. So it's what you're both talking about. So go have your surgery, and guess what? Tomorrow you're going to be in bed, and you'll get up a couple of times and go for a pee. But that's going to be your day tomorrow. Now you tell me that you go. Let's say it's a stay-at-home mom. We'll create a scenario here with 2 young kids. Well, I have to go to the gym every day and ride the elliptical for 40 minutes because that's my stress relief. And if I don't do that, I'm going to murder somebody, And I say, all right, but go have your surgery, but you won't be going to the gym for a couple of months to ride an elliptical. And that's the best outcome. Humor me. Let's try virtual surgery, and I'll make a big deal out of it. There you are. I anoint you. You've just had your surgery. Now start behaving like a post-surgical person. We're going to organize a graded recovery. We're going to start moving in a stress-free way. We're going to create some daily habits here. Just very light, but very specific exercises to tune the mobility and the stability in your body and moving in a way that you don't create stress concentrations. Then we're going to add just a little bit more endurance. Walk backwards up a hill. This is all before sled dragging and everything. Mm-hmm. Just walk backwards up a hill, and you will find the exhausted quads. Now walk forwards up the hill, and the brain perceives the exhausted quads. It goes and gets the glutes. I don't have to coach that. The brain does that because it perceives this neurological trick of the exhausted quads. This is fabulous. And then, okay, now we can add a little bit of strength. Let's do a few carry patterns, a push and a pull, and then we'll do a lift and this isn't boasting. It's true, and I can back it up. We followed up with every patient we saw at the experimental clinic at the university. Of the subcategory of people that had failed all approaches, and they were told the last hope for you is a surgical route. So if that's why you came to us, the last hope is surgery. If you did the virtual surgery that I just described, 95% of them avoided surgery, and in a 2-year follow-up, we're glad that they did.
Wow.
So that's a pretty impressive statistic for they were now at the end of the road, and that was rightly or wrongly, someone had told them that the surgical route was the last option. So 95%, that's 19 out of 20 avoided surgery. Now, there are those surgery. I don't want to leave it on a note where surgery is never needed. It absolutely is. Yeah. And thank goodness we have some skilled spine surgeons.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. But all of these people who think they need spine surgery, just give it a rest and rebuild like you're a post-surgical patient.
You had a question there. That was interesting.
Absolutely. I'm always fascinated with what the future can hold. And I would love to hear your perspective on where you would like to see, or things that you would like to, see other researchers do in terms of the lumbar spine, in terms of research. I think having the research that you've done in the past has been paramount in our understanding of how to help people get out of pain. But just like with any other science, like that, we can always advance, we can always get better and better. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were in terms of that.
Well, this response might surprise you. If you went to the neck, I wish someone would do what we did in the lumbar spine with the neck. So that's a wide open area for someone who wants to take that one on. That's really needed. But going to the lumbar spine, I'm here in Columbus this week to attend Swiss. So help me out here. Society for Weight Training Specialists. Weight training injury specialists is the meeting. Run by Dave Tate and Ken Kanakin. I've been coming to these since they began in the late 90s. I would come, obviously the geeky professor, I suppose. And my colleagues back at the university would say, "Oh, where were you?" And I said, "Well, I go to Swiss." "What's that? Isn't that the thing with all the coaches? Why would you go to that? Why don't you go to the medical meetings?" Which I did, but I found them rather boring. I said, "Well, when I talk to the coaches, or if they ask me a question and my answer is I don't know, I file that. I'm going to come back next year, and hopefully in the intervening year, I will have been able to probe in the laboratory or clinic or wherever it was, so I can come back next year and give them an answer." So it was very important to me to listen to the people who are on the front line, the coaches and trainers, and find out what they need to know to change people's lives. And if more people did that in driving their research to the things that matter, that would be the best thing for the future of the lumbar spine. So there is an answer you probably didn't expect, but that's it.
That's great. I mean, and we've had conversations about how coaches and trainers have such a massive responsibility for behavior change in people, and they can make huge positive outcomes given the proper information and the proper direction. And it's great to hear, because I'm going to be wandering the halls, listening to things and gaining insights and trying to be a better coach myself. It's like I come to these as a coach, as a practitioner, and just try to be better and better. And that's great to hear from someone that has spent so much time in the trenches on the research side, to be like, this is what's important for the future of, lumbar spine, and for coaches to just gain that insight and gain that knowledge to just be better.
Let me frame this up a slightly different way to think about it. Think of every system in the human body. There's the musculoskeletal system, the cardiovascular system, the hormonal system, the psychological system. Every single one of those is highly affected by movement. And movement has a tipping point. That is either going to be anabolic or catabolic, depending on which side of the tipping point you are, too much or too little. So your body needs mechanical stress from movement. If you go to your family doc and have a question about, "Oh, my blood sugar is very high, I'm pre-diabetic," what is the chance that you're going to get a prescription, or at least a assessment to lead them to understand that movement is the biggest modulator they can do at this stage? The right amount of exercise would be the best medicine for that person. What's the chance of them getting that from their family doc? I would say pretty slim. Mm-hmm. Who owns movement? Look at the entire healthcare rubric. It's the coaches and the trainers. They have the biggest potential to modify the health of their patients and the public. Now, that's the way it is. It's an enormous responsibility. So I, thank goodness we have associations like Swiss that try and raise the mastery of all of these people who are in charge of about the most potent health influencer that people can do, and that is good training. So again, that's a pretty strong statement, but that's how I feel.
Going down that road, what would you say are the most positive changes you've seen over the past 20 years?
Boy, if you gave me the reciprocal of that question, some of the negative changes.
Well, I know that. I'm going the other direction.
Yeah, you're going to the other direction. Well, one might be I'm not on social media. And that is such a double-edged sword. It can be the worst thing that people can get messed up on. And now everybody has an opinion and a voice when they haven't earned it. But there are a few voices that you should listen to. Now, how do you know who those people are? And there's just so much of one person bringing another group down to make themselves look better and more credible. And so that's the worst side of it all, but I guess there's also a best side of it.
But hasn't that always been the case? It's just now louder.
I don't think people who were marketers with a big voice Well, I guess so. Yeah, they were still there. They had to rent magazine and newspaper space, so it was harder. But now they can do whatever beautiful marketing display they want on social media and suddenly become credible and manufacture their likes and everything else. But anyway, I'm trying to think of the expertise. Personal trainers weren't that popular 20 years ago. So the public had to figure it out for themselves. Mm-hmm. But, now the other side of my brain is thinking more than half of the people I see have been created or exacerbated by personal trainers who didn't know their stuff. So, there's ones who are fabulous.
Yeah. So we'll stay on the what are the worst things that you've seen over the past 20 years, because we're kind of going down that road anyhow, and not just that field, but in strength conditioning, looking at it from an overview, or it's just sport medicine, looking at an overview. How have we gone backwards, or how has it gotten worse?
Now that you mentioned sport medicine, I would say when I started 40 years ago, the average sports medicine specialist was a better diagnostician. Now that would surprise you. They had more time, and they would they knew their orthopedic tests. I would say that's harder to come by now. Is there in the current healthcare rubric a billing code for a back pain assessment? It doesn't exist. So no one gets paid to do an assessment. They get paid to do the thing that they're trained in, whether it's a manipulation or an injection or taking a picture or interpreting a picture or whatever it is. But nowhere is a clinician paid by a billing code. I get asked all the time, can I submit your bill to the insurance, and what's the insurance code? I said, well, they don't exist. Mm-hmm. So that has gone backwards, I would say.
Even with the technology.
Well, what technology can replace his eyes, his hands, his psychology to read a person? They say, they're going to replace by AI. I don't think they will be able to feel that, as I said, that flicker of pain in the muscle, or the wincing of the eyes, or the emotions that person tells about the responsibility they have to feed their family, and they must get back out tomorrow on that fishing vessel or on the jackhammer or whatever it is they're doing.
So then what advice would that leave to the athlete or the person that's looking for help?
Well, that will sound very self-serving.
Sure, that's all right.
That's why I did what I did. I then realized I had to create a clinician who had these skills to really get at the pathway to that individual's pain. And that person will not be trained in any single medical profession, but they will be savvy to neurology, movement, anatomy, biomechanics, psychology, sociology, etc. And that's what we tried to put together to create that person who can figure out why that person's in pain and what they have to do to get out of pain and then get back to living their best life. Now, that sounds like a commercial, and as I said, it's self-serving, but I did it because I felt it was the only way, and it had.
How many do you have now?
The master clinicians I identify, and then I train them myself. So I spend a lot of time with these people. I don't know how many we have. Is it 15 maybe?
I would say about 15.
Yeah, something like that. And then we have the certified clinicians, which take 50 hours of listening to me online, and then we meet for 3 days somewhere and we do hands-on skills level training. And then there's quite a rigorous exam. They have to pass the exam. And I personally went through your exam, by the way, because
I was sweating.
And it's not easy. We don't give these certifications away. You don't get it for attending. You get it by demonstrating your ability to change people's lives. And we have maybe 40 or 50 of those now. So that's...
And if somebody is interested in that, how do they go about it?
Well, we have a website called BackFitPro, backfitpro.com, and you can enter as a clinician if you want support materials as a clinician, or as a back pained person. I hate the word patient. They're people who have back pain. Back pained people. And they enter there, and then they can, here's some support materials if you want to see one of our clinicians. Here they are. It's their picture, their website, contact coordinates, and that kind of thing.
Did you have any other questions?
No, I just have to thank you for the work that you've done and being able to provide something for coaches like me to expand our horizon. Right. I think it's not only has it helped me become a better coach for people that are in pain with their low back, it's also helped me to become a better coach day-to-day life with the importance of constantly assessing and asking better questions and, showing up for a client and just being there for them every single time that they're with me and supporting them outside and giving them things that, I can constantly help them be better. And I appreciate the work you've done and allowing me to be a part of the crew.
Well, I go straight back at you as well. Thanks for making us look good, and I hope we can make you look good. And Dave,
absolutely,
thanks for doing all that you've done over the years. You've always been fair to me, although once in a while you gave me the gears, but that's okay. And you've had such integrity in what you've built here, what you've done for your clients, and just with the whole effort in raising everybody up as you've done. And I will commend you for that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming out. Look forward to your presentation and everything you're going to do in the future.
All right.
All right, guys, we're done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
You guys are selecting Merrick for your telehealth platform needs. They have a couple different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. There's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are, thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk Merrick Health for all your hormone optimization and performance needs.